I really hope you're as excited as I am about these gorgeous 2 new formulas that Microsoft have just gifted to us. We've got the Groupby and we've got Pivotby. They first kind of released them back in 2023, but they were only in beta version, so they weren't available in common use for us. So I'm hoping that you've been aware of them and you've been waiting on the edge of your seat to see what they're going to do. The best way for me to describe them is they are going to analyse data for us in ways that we might have before used sum ifs or pivot tables. It's literally going to give us one formula to produce amazing summaries, and they've got lots of different options. So the data I'm going to demo these to you with today is this data. It's literally got 10 rows. We've got some sales data by region, by sales rep, by product. We've got the date and we've got the number, the quantity of sales, and also the value of the sales. So it's just simple data we're going to use. If I wanted to see the total quantity for each sales rep, then we would have had to use a sum if. We would have had to list each of the individual sales reps, which of course we've got that brilliant unique formula we could have used to list the individual sales reps, and then we would have had to use a sum if formula to sum the quantity for each of those sales reps. So that would have been 2 formulas altogether. The downside of using those formulas though is that if I had changed the sales rep, I would have had to copy the formulas down into more rows. The beauty of the Groupby and the Pivotby formulas is that they're dynamics. They will automatically extend themselves if the data changes. They're amazing. Okay, so let's get straight in. If I select cell H1 here, I'm going to go to the insert function, and I've already selected them. So there's Groupby, and it tells you that it's going to aggregate values by row fields. So the Groupby is going to basically give you rows, almost like a list of data summarised, whereas your Pivotby will give you like a matrix version. It's going to be rows and columns, pretty much like a pivot table, of course. Okay, so Groupby, I have a click OK. We're going to use the wizard. I'm going to use the wizard to start with. I'm also going to show you the syntax because there's more help in the syntax. But I'm going to start with the wizard. As you might be aware already, where the descriptions are bold, they are mandatory. Where they're not bold, they are optional, so you don't have to fill those in if you don't need to. The wizard also will include commas after each of these boxes, or arguments as they're actually called. That's their official title. The wizard will also include any speech marks if they're relevant as well. So the wizard quite often is easier to use with new formulas. It also gives you guidance as to what to put in each field. So this first field wants to know the row fields. It says this is the range or array containing the row fields. So what we said we wanted, if we just put this out of the way, we said we wanted to see by sales rep what the quantities were. So our rows are actually going to be the sales rep column. So I'm literally going to highlight B1 to B11. We don't need any dollars here. It's free as it is because it's a dynamic range. We don't need to copy this formula down anywhere. The next field is the values, and that is described as the range or array containing the values to aggregate. So these are the values that we're going to add together essentially in this instance. Sorry. So this instance is going to be the quantity. So I'm going to highlight E1 to E11. The next field is the function. So this is the calculation to apply. Now the Groupby and the Pivotby have more than 17 different formulas. I will show you the different formula options shortly. For now, I'm just going to type in sum. And this is where using the wizard is not terribly helpful. It does say that the function used to do the aggregations is what's required here, but it doesn't give you a list of them. For now, I'm just going to put sum in and I'll show you more options in a minute. So I'm going to say I want to sum those options. These field headers and total depth are they're completely optional, so I'll show you those from the syntax in a second. In fact, I'll show you now. So field headers, if we click into that box, it tells us here that we can choose a number between 0 and 3 to specify whether the field data has headers and whether we want them to be shown or not. Number between 0 and 3, that's kind of a clue, but it doesn't tell you what each number does. What does 0 do? What does 1 do? What does 2 do? It doesn't help. So that's why it's easy to show you this from the syntax. The total depth says it shows totals for the row fields, and this actually gives you more guidance. It says 0 is going to be none, so don't show any totals. 1 would show you grand totals, and number 2 would show you grand totals and first level subtotals. So that's quite useful. It's given us guidance to what they mean. So that's a bit more helpful. From here, just be aware that we can include headers on our data and we can include totals. We'll show you that from the syntax. So if I click OK, we'll now complete that formula. And the result of that formula is here now. It's in column H. How cool is that? It's literally summarised by each sales rep what the total quantity is, and we can see the total is 1314. And if we literally highlight the quantity column, we can see from the sum at the bottom It is, it's 1314, so it's right, perfect. Okay, now the beauty of this group by formula, as you can see that the formula is in this cell H1, and you can see that the surrounding area has got like the shadow box around it, which basically indicates it is it's a dynamic formula, so it's spilled into these cells. If I click into the row below, you'll see the formula's there, identical to what it is in H1, but it's greyed. So I can't make any amendments to that formula because it's a dynamic formula. So that will appear on any of those cells that the result spills into. But we can only edit it from that very first cell there in H1. Okay. If I go back to the raw data and I was to change David there to Tracy, automatically you'll see our dynamic formula has spilled and given us an extra row for Tracy, and it's given me a total. It's expanded it's moved the total row down, and it now includes that. So it's instant, unlike with pivot tables where you'd need to refresh them. So that's another thing that I love about the group by function. Okay, I'm just going to show you the syntax. So if I press F2 to open the cell for editing, and click into the formula, you'll see it gives me the syntax underneath. I'm just going to move the screen across a little bit so you can see that a bit easier. So if I press F2, there's the syntax. This is the same as every other formula in Excel. It shows you the syntax beneath. As whichever bit we click into, it will bold it within the syntax so you can see which part of the formula you're currently looking at. If I was to select row fields from the syntax, it highlights B1 to B11 because that's what represents the row fields. If I click on E1 to E11, it bolds it in the function. So you've got dual purpose there. What I'm trying to get to is I want to show you this sum because this is the function. Now, if I delete sum from that formula, you'll see it gives me the list of all of the formulas that are available. This is really cool. So I typed in sum, so it's using sum. Here we could get it to show us the average or the max. What's the highest? What's the biggest quantity that's been sold? We could use count, see how many individual sales have happened. We've got all of these different options that we could move to. We also have lambda. I'm not sure if you're familiar with lambda, but lambda is used to create your own unique formulas. So if you have a formula you would like to perform here, which isn't in the list, you can create your own formula using a lambda and you could apply that instead. So that's why I always say there's more than 17 functions. Okay. However, I'm quite happy with the sum, so I'm going to keep the sum. Now, what you can see here, all of these other options, and because they're in the square brackets, that represents that they are the optional ones. So if I type in a sum, it will move across to our field headers, and it gives me the list of options. So do you remember in the wizard, it just said pick a number between 0 and 3. So there's your options, 0 to 3, but that's what they mean. So it's easier to pick these from the syntax. So we can say no, we could use a 0 to say no, there's no headers. We can say number 1, yes, but don't show the headers, which basically is telling the formula that because our range goes from B1 to B11, we're saying that row 1 has headers, so ignore it from the data, but don't show the headers. Number 2 says no, it doesn't have headers, but generate them, please. So that'd be interesting. And then we've got number 3, yes, and please show them. So I'm going to choose a 3 here. So it's actually going to include a header column for us. That's nice. If I put in another comma, it gives us that 5th field, which was our total depth, if you remember from the wizard, which was whether or not to show subtotals. And interestingly, on the wizard, it gave us 0 to 0, 1 and 2 and what they meant, but it didn't give us -1 and -2. So again, you get even more information doing it this way. So we've essentially got 0 to show no totals, we've got 1 for a grand total, we've got 2 for grand and subtotals, and then we've got -1 and -2, which basically puts the totals at the top instead of at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to go for a number 1 here, and that will be fine. We've also got things like sort order, filter array, field relationships, so we could use those if we wanted to change the order of the data as well. I'm not going to show you those today. I think we've got enough. So if I press enter, we can see now there's our headers, sales rep and quantity, and there's our totals, which is really cool. Now we can take this to another level. So of course, I've got my group by using column B, which is literally the sales rep. Now what I could do, let's just look at our data again. If I wanted to see the sales rep and the product, I could change my formula. So instead of saying use column B, I could say use column B and C. So I'm now saying group the sales rep and the products, and then also show me the total quantity because it's at column E. Again, I could amend that and say, I don't want to see just the quantity, I want to see the quantity and the sales value. So now it's going to sum the 2 columns. So I just press enter on that, you'll see it extends that table and it's given us There's our headings. So this is a quantity column, this is a sales value. And again, if I highlight that sales value column, you can see the total is 20,755. Yes, which is brilliant. Okay, now because I've now got different layers of data, I've got the sales rep and the product, what I can now do, if I go back into the formula, where I've got the total depth, if I delete the 1 to get the list again, so if I use a number 2 here, we get grand totals and subtotals, so it can be subtotals by each person. Because right now, looking at that data, we can just see David had product A and product C in the totals, but we can't see the totals for David anymore. So if I literally change that 1 to a 2, we'll see we now have David's totals and then his individual products and the grand total at the bottom. Okay. Of course, if I change that 2 to a -2, if you remember the list, the -2 is going to show the grand total and the subtotals at the top of each list instead. So what we can see here, there's your grand total at the top. Let me make that wider. So there's your grand total, and there's David's total, followed by the individual products for David. And then there's Emily's total, followed by the individual products for Emily. Okay, so we just get so many options for headers, for totals, for sorting, and we can use multiple fields at the same time. Now this is perfect, this group by, because we can see it's almost given us a separate list, isn't it, by all the totals, by quantity, by sales value. If I wanted that more of a matrix, I'm just going to go across to column M here, and I'm going to do a pivot by here. So if I go to insert function and choose pivot by, it tells you here this will aggregate values by rows and columns. So this is the extra step that you don't get with group by. I click OK. So here you'll see we get an extra field for column fields. So here, my row fields, I'm just going to keep this one simple. I'm literally going to say my row is going to be, I'm going to do sales rep. So I'm going to have rows representing each person. And then my column, this wants to know the range or array containing the column fields. So here I might want this to be the product. So if I highlight those, my values, I'm just going to do the quantity. Let's move that out of the way. So that I'm just going to choose the quantity, column E. And then the function is going to be the sum again. But again, we get all those same formulas that we got with group by. Field headers, I'm going to use 3, which says there are headers and please put them in. And I'm going to click OK. Oh, now let's look at this little beauty. So over here, there we go. So this is almost like exactly what a pivot table would look like. We've got products, we've got the product name, and we've got it's a quantity field. Okay, we've got the sales rep down the side. So we're still seeing the 1314 that we got for the grand total, but here we can see the total for each person, and we can also see the total for each product, which we couldn't really get from there by product because we didn't have the subtotals by product, but here we can. So this gives us an extra layer of data. Now the beauty of this is that unlike a pivot table, we don't need to refresh it. So let's say I go across here and I change where I changed it to Tracy before. If I change it back to David, automatically you'll see Tracy's disappeared from that pivot, well, what looks like a pivot table, and it now is updated automatically, which is amazing. Okay. Of course, we could also make it, instead of showing the values for just the quantity, let me just see what will happen here if I make it the quantity and the value. And press enter. Okay, so it's now expanded. So we've got these two columns of product A. This is a quantity, this is a sales value. Okay, so we've now separated it out. We've got totals as well. Let me move across. Oh, it's not populated those for some reason. And I guess if you're familiar with pivot tables, because I'm looking at this already thinking, oh, well, I'd like to move the order now. I'd like to put sales value separately at the end, like we'd just drag across in a pivot table. So it's not as simple to use, but you still get the options of moving them about. If I press F2, look into the syntax, you get lots of different options. So you can change your column sort order. So again, that's how you'd move the column orders as opposed to just dropping and dragging in the pivot table. So you've still got all of the options. There's just tons of them. But like I say, it's one great big formula there that you don't have to drag down. It's dynamic. It will update automatically. You don't have to refresh it. It just instantly will show you the result, which is really cool. If you're still not convinced about pivot by, one amazing thing you can do with the pivot by formula that you cannot do, it's not possible to achieve this with a pivot table, is because with a pivot table, what goes in the values bit always has to be a number. if you remember. So it always has to be a number that is calculated somehow. So if I wanted to have a list of all the regions, let me just move across and show you the data again. If I wanted to have a list of all the regions that each sales rep works in, I couldn't really do that with a pivot table. I'd almost have to do it with two separate fields, so it wouldn't be that easy. The pivot by, let me show you how this works. So if I just go into W1 and I'm going to go insert function, I'm going to do pivot by and click OK. So my row fields are going to be, let me move this across, it's going to be my sales rep because I want a row for each person. I'm going to actually leave my column fields blank because I don't need columns, but I just want to populate some values based on the region. Okay, now the function, I'm going to use a function called array to text. I may not have got that right, we'll double check it in a second. And my field headers, yes, let's have a 3 in there because there are headers and I want them included. So let me just click OK and see if I've done this right. Okay, yes, I have. So what you can see here, look, how beautiful is that? So I've now got, let me just bold those and center those so we can see their headings. So sales rep, I've got each sales rep, and then in this column, I've literally got the regions that they operate in. Now you could not do this with a pivot table. So I am really loving this function. Now in this instance, I've included number 3 there, which as you'll remember was yes and show the totals, wasn't it? Is that the bit we're in? Oh no, field headers. Right, let me go to, so we wanted the field headers, which we've got. The totals, it is showing the total, but this instance, it's kind of pointless because we know what all the regions are, so we don't really need it. So I'm going to actually put a note in there. What happens if you don't fill these fields in? It kind of defaults to include a total and don't include the headers, as you can see. So I'm going to put a note in there to specifically say don't include any totals. Press enter. Okay, and there we go. So now we literally have the list of the sales reps and the specific regions that they operate in, which is pretty cool. So if you use Pivot by for nothing else, you'll be using it for this kind of thing, which is fab. So I hope that's a good insight for you into what Pivot by and Group by are useful for. But if you have any questions, please do reach out. I'd love to hear what you think of them as well. Enjoy!